Every morning in Waco is similar to the previous one. I wake up at first light, a habit left over from my working days. The body remembers the schedule even when the mind has long since resigned itself to retirement. My bedroom faces east, and the light usually sneaks in through the old blinds I haven't changed in 20 years. Why change something that works? It's a principle I've applied all my life, to things, to work, to relationships. Maybe that's why I still live in the house I bought 40 years ago when Elaine and I were first married. My name is Wilmot Broom. I'm 72 years old, and for the last 5 years I've lived alone. Elaine was taken by cancer, quickly and ruthlessly, leaving me in a house full of memories and emptiness. Our children, Tansy, Flint, and Carrie, have long since separated. Sometimes I think they have forgotten I exist. After washing and shaving, I still use a regular razor, not those newfangled electric buzzers. I make myself a simple breakfast: eggs, toast, sometimes oatmeal if the weather is cool. Then I put on my worn cap, which Elaine always threatened to throw away, and go for a morning walk. Waco is changing. New houses are sprouting up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Old buildings are being torn down to build another shopping center. But my part of town, the eastern edge, is still resisting change. There are still wooden houses with verandas where old people like me sit in the evenings, watching the occasional passerby and reminiscing about the past. My daily walk usually takes me to Delia's Diner. I take my favorite corner table, order a coffee, black, no sugar, and unfold a newspaper. A real paper, not these newfangled news stories on phones that everyone is so obsessed with. At the diner, I meet familiar faces: Greg, the former mailman; Martha, who used to teach elementary school; sometimes Paul, a recently retired mechanic. We nod at each other, sometimes exchanging a few phrases about the weather or the city news, but mostly we remain silent, realizing the value of silence in an increasingly loud world. For 35 years I drove a school bus. Every morning and every evening, in snow and heat, rain and wind. I knew every kid's name, remembered their birthdays, knew who was friends with whom and who feuded with whom. For many, I was the first adult they saw in the morning and the last in the evening. I watched the children grow up. The first graders become graduates. Their faces, hairstyles, clothes changed, but the essence did not change. They still made the same noise, laughed, fought, and made peace. Some of them now bring their children to school, and sometimes when I meet them on the street they recognize me, smile, and say, "Hello." Those moments warm my old heart. After the diner, I usually go to the library or to the park if the weather is nice. In the park, there is a bench under an old oak tree where I can sit for hours watching the life around me. Young moms with strollers, couples holding hands, lonely joggers with headphones in their ears, cut off from the world by their music. Sometimes Leon Ferguson, my neighbor, sits down with me, and we play chess on a small board he always carries with him. Leon is the only person I can talk to about the past without feeling like a museum piece. I spend my evenings at home, cooking a simple dinner, watching old movies on TV, or rereading books I know almost by heart. Flint, my middle son, calls once a week, asks how I'm doing, tells me a little about his job in Seattle. Carrie, the youngest, sends holiday cards and occasional pictures of grandchildren I hardly know. And Tansy only calls when she needs something, usually money. This past Tuesday, I decided to change my routine and went to the flea market on the outskirts of town. Elaine loved those places, finding amazing things there that would later decorate our house. I hadn't been there since her death, but something pulled me there that morning. Wandering between the rows, looking at the old furniture, vinyl records, and worn toys, I remembered how Elaine and I used to come here on Saturdays, how she haggled with the salesman, how her eyes lit up when she found something special. For a moment I thought I heard her laughing, and I turned around, but all I saw was a young couple looking at an antique mirror. At one of the counters I stopped, attracted by the glint of metal. On a worn velvet cloth lay ancient coins. I'm not a collector, but my Uncle Harold was. When he died 15 years ago, he left me his collection in a small wooden box. I kept it on the top shelf of my closet, not giving it much thought. Just a memory of an uncle who was kind to me as a child. Interested in numismatics? The voice next to me belonged to a thin man with a neat gray beard. His name tag said, "Pennant Hawk Collector." "Not really," I answered. "I just have some old coins from my uncle. May I see them?" The man's eyes lit up with professional interest. I shook my head. "They're at home, in a box. If you decide to show me, here's my card." He handed me a small rectangle of paper. "I specialize in 19th century American coins. Some of them are worth a fortune now." I politely took the card, not planning to call. But the conversation got me thinking about my uncle's jewelry box. Back home, I pulled it from the shelf and opened it. Inside, in little velvet nests, were coins of various sizes and colors. Some were dull from time, others retained their luster. I didn't know what they were, but I decided to call this Pennant Hawk, just out of curiosity. He arrived the next day, bringing a magnifying glass and some reference books. When he saw the collection, his hands trembled slightly. "Mr. Broom," he said after a long examination, "you have no idea what you have here. This coin," he pointed to a small silver circle, "is a flying eagle from the year 857, very few of which have survived. And this," he pointed to another, "is the seated liberty of the 871st, one of the rarest in the series." I listened to him, not fully understanding the meaning of his words, until he named the sum for which I could buy just these two coins. The figure was astronomical. It turned out that Uncle Harold, a quiet postal clerk, had spent his life collecting not just old metal rounds but real treasures. Pennant Hawk offered to buy the entire collection, but I declined, saying I needed time to think about it. He understood and left his number, asking me to call him when I had made a decision. That evening I sat in a chair for a long time, holding the coin box, thinking about the unexpected wealth and how it could change my life. I could travel, buy a new house or car, help my grandchildren with their education. But do I need all that? At my age, the needs are simple: a roof over my head, food on the table, books on the shelf. Still, the very possibility of choice was intoxicating. The phone rang when the clock read almost 10 p.m. It was Tansy, my oldest daughter. "Daddy?" Her voice sounded unusually friendly. "How are you?" I couldn't remember the last time she had called just to ask how I was. Usually her calls started with "Daddy, I need," and ended with the amount she wanted to borrow. "Fine," I answered cautiously. "Why?" "Nothing. I just wanted to see how you were doing. You haven't called in a while." I chuckled. We both knew she was the one who hadn't called in months. Same old, Tansy. I'm living it up. "Listen," I was thinking, "maybe I could come by and see you one of these days, just to check in. It's been a while." I felt my eyebrows rise in surprise. Tansy, who was always too busy to visit her old father, suddenly wanted to come. Why now? Did she somehow find out about the coins? No, that was impossible. I hadn't told anyone except Pennant Hawk, and he didn't know who my family was. "Of course," I said, trying to hide the suspicion in my voice. "You're welcome to come." We made plans for Saturday. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time, staring at the coin box and thinking about the strange coincidence. Maybe I'm getting paranoid in my old age. Maybe Tansy really just missed me. But the years had taught me not to believe in coincidences, especially when it came to my oldest daughter. I tucked the box back on the top shelf of the closet and decided I'd be careful. Very careful. Tansy's sudden concern could have been genuine, but it could also have been something else. Either way, Saturday's meeting promised to be interesting. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about the past. How little Tansy had sat on my lap while I read her stories. How she had laughed when I tossed her in the air. How she had cried when I drove her to college. When and why did everything change? When, in her eyes, did I go from being a hero daddy to a burden, a source of money, an old man to visit on holidays unless I had better plans? Maybe Saturday will answer those questions, or maybe it would just bring new ones. Saturday came sooner than I expected. In the morning, I tidied myself more thoroughly than usual. I put on a fresh shirt, which I usually saved for special occasions, cleaned my old but still sturdy shoes, even tried to smooth my unruly gray hair. He also prepared the house, dusted the photos on the mantelpiece, vacuumed the carpet in the living room, washed the dishes that had accumulated in the sink. Why, though? Tansy always found something to pick on. She arrived at noon sharp. I watched through the window as her used blue sedan pulled up in front of the house. Tansy got out, fixed her hair in front of the rearview mirror, and headed for the porch. I opened the door before she could knock. "Hi, Dad," she smiled and hugged me awkwardly. She smelled like floral perfume and cigarettes, which she tried to disguise with mint gum. "Tansy," I nodded, letting her into the house. "You look good." It was a half-truth. She was still slim and attractive in her 45, but the wrinkles around her eyes and mouth, the overly bright makeup, and the premature graying she tried ineptly to hide with cheap paint spoke of a hard life. "You're okay, too," she gave me an appraising look. "Even dressed up? In honor of what?" "In honor of my daughter's visit," I spread my hands. "It's not every day that something like this happens." She ignored my hint and walked into the living room looking around like an inspector. "Jesus, Dad, nothing changes in here. Same old chairs, same carpet. And these pictures," she pointed to the mantelpiece, where there were pictures of our family from Elaine's lifetime. "Don't you think it's time for an update? Why change something that works?" I shrugged. "Would you like some tea? Coffee?" "Let me make it myself." She headed for the kitchen. "And I'll see what you've got to eat. I bet you're eating convenience foods, aren't you?" Without waiting for an answer, she opened the refrigerator and began to examine its contents, clucking her tongue. I knew it. Eggs, milk, cheese that seems to be older than me. "Dad, you need to take better care of yourself." "I'm doing fine," I replied calmly, "and the cheese is pretty normal." "I have groceries in my car," she said, closing the refrigerator. "I'll make something decent." Before I could object, she was out the door and back with 2 large bags. Tansy spent the next hour in my kitchen, chopping, frying, boiling, constantly commenting on the state of the dishes, stove, and cooking utensils. I sat at the table, watching this sudden display of filial concern and trying to figure out what was behind it. "So," she began, stirring something in the pot, "how are you doing? How's your health?" "Normal for my age. My knees sometimes hurt in the rain, my blood pressure spikes, but nothing serious." "Do you see a doctor regularly?" "When I need to." "What about money? Is your pension enough?" Here it is. The first cautious question about finances. "I have enough for my modest needs," I answered evasively. "The house is paid off. I pay the bills on time, even for newspapers' remains. And for repairs." She looked around. "The house is old. Something always breaks. Is the roof leaking? Is the wiring okay?" "Tansy," I looked her straight in the eye. "Why the questions? You weren't interested in how I lived before." She hesitated for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together. "I'm just worried, Dad. We all do. You're out here alone, getting older. What if something happens? Who's going to help?" "The neighbors are nice," I said. "Leon Ferguson comes by almost every day. And if it's serious, I have an emergency button." I pointed to a small device around my neck, hidden under my shirt. Elaine insisted before she died that I wear it. It's nice, but it doesn't solve all problems. Tansy placed a plate in front of me with something that smelled delicious. Here, eat it while it's hot. I had to admit, she was always a good cook, inherited the talent from her mother. We ate in relative silence, exchanging minor phrases about the weather, about her job at the supermarket. She'd been a cashier for years, about the neighbors. Then she did the dishes and started cleaning without asking my permission. "Don't, Tansy," I tried to stop her when she took up the broom. "I can do it myself." "Come on, Dad," she waved it away. "Look at all this dust everywhere. When was the last time you cleaned the bookshelves? Did you ever clean under the bed?" I gave in and let her take over. She washed, cleaned, rearranged things, occasionally resenting the clutter or outdated items. When she approached the bedroom closet, I tensed, but she only rearranged the boxes on the lower shelves without reaching the one that held the coin box. As she cleaned up, she kept unobtrusively asking me about my life, my pension, my savings. I answered evasively, trying not to reveal my cards. When she asked if there was anything left of Uncle Harold, I decided to probe. "Just some old stuff in the attic. I think there was a coin collection, but I don't even know where it is now." "Coins?" Her hands wiping the picture frame froze for a moment. "What coins?" "Nothing much," I shrugged, trying to look indifferent. "Old metal rounds he collected. Sentimental value only." "Where are they now?" she asked, trying to hide her interest behind a nonchalant tone. "I have no idea. Maybe in the attic, maybe thrown out when Elaine moved in. It's been so many years." She nodded, but I noticed the change in her gaze. There was something predatory, calculating in it now. I suddenly remembered how, as a child, she'd looked the same way at the toys she wanted to take away from the younger ones. By evening, the house was shining clean, and I was exhausted, not so much physically as emotionally. The constant tension, the need to watch every word, to analyze every question Tansy asked, it was more exhausting than the hardest job. "Well, now we can live like human beings." She looked at the result of her labors with satisfaction. "I'll leave some food in the fridge, enough for a few days, and I'll come by more often to check on you." "You don't have to worry," I started, but she interrupted. "No worries, Dad. You're my father and I have to take care of you. We all do. By the way, I talked to Flint and Carrie. They're worried about you too." "They could have called," I said. "They've got their own worries, you know. Work, kids. But they love you, really." I didn't say anything. A love that only shows itself when there's a personal interest is not the kind of love I believe in. Tansy left, promising to stop by in a couple days. Closing the door behind her, I took a deep breath, feeling oddly relieved to be alone again. I made my way to the bedroom, pulling the coin box from the top shelf and checking to make sure everything was in place. Then I hid it in a new place, behind a false panel in the living room wall that only Elaine and I knew about. The old house kept its secrets. The next week turned into a strange dance. Tansy showed up almost every day, always with food, always eager to clean, to do laundry, to cook. Each time finding an excuse to check closets, shelves, drawers. Every time she discreetly asked about finances, about the deeds to the house, about the will. I pretended not to notice these attempts and continued to answer evasively. On Thursday, she brought her grandson Lloyd, a 22-year-old guy I'd only seen a couple times in my life. Tall, thin, with a permanently downcast gaze and headphones in his ears, he was practically a stranger to me. Tansy had gotten him to say hello and even chat with me a little, but the conversation didn't flow. All he wanted to know was when we were going back. "He's just shy," Tansy explained later. "In fact, he asks about you a lot." I doubted Lloyd even knew who I was before this visit. On Friday, Tansy stayed longer than usual. She made dinner, even covered the table with a tablecloth she found in the linen closet. We ate by candlelight like it was some kind of holiday. "Dad," she began as we moved on to dessert, "I was thinking, why don't we have a real family dinner? Invite Flint and Carrie and their families, get together like old times." "Why?" I asked them straight out. "They haven't come for years. Why now?" "Because we all miss each other." She took my hand, her eyes begging me to believe. "Because we want to catch up, to be a real family again." I stared at her, trying to see in this 45-year-old woman with the hard lines around her eyes and dyed hair the little girl I'd once loved so much. The one who asked me to read to her before bedtime, who snuggled up to me during thunderstorms, who told me I was the best daddy in the world. Where did that little girl go? When did that calculating woman with the fake smile take her place? "Okay," I said finally. "When?" "Next Saturday. I already talked to Flint and Carrie and they can make it. Flint even promised to take time off work." "Where are we going to meet?" "There's not enough room for everyone." "At my house," she smiled. "I'll organize everything. All you have to do is come and enjoy the company of your family." I nodded, though I felt a twinge of foreboding inside. Something told me that this family dinner wasn't a simple reunion. Tansy was planning something, and I was sure it had something to do with the coins. "I'll look forward to it," I said, hoping my smile looked genuine. When Tansy left, I sat in my chair for a long time, thinking about the upcoming dinner. Maybe I'm being unfair to my daughter? Maybe she really just wants to bring the family together. But then, why now? After all these years of indifference? Why right after I found out about the value of the coins? No, there's no such thing as coincidence. At least not like this. Tansy somehow found out about the coins and now she's trying to get to them. But how? I hadn't told anyone except Pennant Hawk, and he didn't know who my family was. That didn't matter anymore, though. What mattered was that I knew her intentions and could prepare. The family dinner promised to be interesting, very interesting. The week leading up to the family dinner dragged on endlessly. Tansy called daily, discussing the menu, seating of guests, and other details that I didn't think deserved so much attention. She announced that Flint was flying in Friday night with his wife Isabella, and Carrie would arrive Saturday morning with her husband Donald and daughter Sheila. "And Dad," she added, as if by the way during the last call, "there's a man I want you to meet. His name is Dexter Latch. We're, dating." "Dating?" I asked, not hiding my surprise. Since her divorce from Lloyd's father 8 years ago, Tansy had sworn she was done with men. "Yeah, for a few months now. He's special, Dad. I think you'll like him." Something in her voice made me wary. Too much enthusiasm for someone who had recently thought all men were useless egomaniacs. On the day of dinner, I wore my only decent suit, the one I'd bought for Elaine's funeral. It hung on me, reminding me how much weight I'd lost over the years. I didn't bother with a tie. I'd never been a fan of those ties. The cab took me to Tansy's house by 6 in the evening. Her little one-story house on the other side of town had all the windows lit up. There were several cars in the driveway, including an expensive black sedan that clearly stood out from the rest. The door was opened by Tansy herself, dressed in a dark blue dress I'd never seen before. She looked younger and happier than usual. "Dad," she exclaimed, hugging me, "you're right on time. Everyone is already here." I entered the house and immediately felt like a stranger. The room was full of people who were theoretically my family, but with whom I barely kept in touch. Flint, my middle son, looked like a successful businessman in an expensive suit. He'd gotten fatter since the last time we'd met 3 years ago, when he'd come to Waco for work and dropped in on me for half an hour. His wife Isabella, a slender woman with a cold stare, only nodded at me from afar. Carrie, my youngest, hadn't changed much, the same soft smile and kind eyes, only there was more gray in her hair. She came over to hug me, and in that hug I felt a genuine warmth. Her husband Donald, a short man with thinning hair, shook my hand, and their daughter Sheila, who must have been in her early 20s, kissed me awkwardly on the cheek. "Grandpa," she said, "you haven't changed at all." The compliment was obvious. I had aged, and we both knew it, but appreciated the attempt. Grandson Lloyd was sitting in the corner, tucked away on his phone, and didn't even look up when I walked in. And this, Tansy motioned me over to a tall man with perfectly styled dark hair and a dazzling smile, is Dexter Latch, my, friend. "A pleasure, Mr. Broom." Dexter shook my hand vigorously. His palm was soft and manicured without the calluses that people used to physical labor had. "Tansy's told me so much about you." She had? I couldn't hide my skepticism. "I hope it's not all bad." "Only the best." He smiled even wider, showing off his perfectly white teeth. "You raised a wonderful daughter." I nodded, unable to find an appropriate response. There was something fake in his enthusiasm, something calculated in the way he kept his arm around Tansy's waist, not like a man in love, but like a man demonstrating ownership. "Dexter works in real estate," Tansy explained, looking at him with an adoration that seemed unnatural. "He specializes in helping seniors with optimizing their assets." "Optimization?" I interjected. "I help people of your generation make the most of their accumulated assets," Dexter explained. "A lot of people don't realize the opportunities they have. Empty big houses, unused land, collectibles that just sit on shelves." He spoke smoothly, as if by rote, and I knew at once that he was a professional con man specializing in gullible old men, so Tansy had found an ally in her plans for my coins. "Sounds interesting," I said neutrally, "but I don't think I need that kind of help." "That's what everyone says at first," he winked at me. "But after they talk to me, they change their minds." Before I could answer, Tansy announced that dinner was ready, and we all moved to the table. I was seated at the head, as if I were the guest of honor. The table was set in the proper way: white tablecloths, the finest dishes, wine glasses, and water glasses. Tansy had obviously prepared for this evening very carefully. The food was excellent. Tansy was always a good cook when she wanted to impress. The conversation at the table flowed casually, but I noticed how carefully everyone avoided any serious topics. They talked about the weather, the latest movies, how the kids were growing up. No one mentioned years of silence, missed holidays, forgotten birthdays. It was like we were just a regular happy family that had just gotten together for dinner. Flint talked about his job at a technology company in Seattle. Carrie showed pictures of her garden on her phone. Tansy put food on the table and made sure the glasses weren't empty. Dexter interjected witty comments and occasionally cast appreciative glances at me. After the main course, Tansy brought dessert, apple pie, which had always been my favorite. She remembered. "To Dad," Tansy raised her glass. "To the man who has always been an example of hard work and honesty to us." The others seconded the toast. I took a sip of wine, watching their faces. What were they really thinking? What did they talk about when I wasn't around? "And also," Tansy continued, "to our family. For us to be closer to each other, to take care of each other, especially for those who need it." Her gaze met mine for a moment, and I saw something like a threat in it. Or was I imagining it? After dessert, we moved back into the living room. Tansy suggested we drink brandy. I agreed, even though I didn't usually drink hard liquor. I wanted to keep a clear head, but refusing could raise suspicion. Dexter volunteered to help her with the drinks, and they went into the kitchen together. I took the moment to talk to Carrie, the only one of my kids who seemed sincere. "How are you really doing, Dad?" she asked quietly while the others were busy talking. "Tansy says you're barely getting by on your own." "Tansy's exaggerating," I replied. "I'm fine. I'm doing as well as anyone." "She's worried that you might—" Carrie hesitated, searching for words. "Make some bad decisions. About the house, the property. So that's it. Tansy was turning the others against me too. I'm sane, Carrie, I said firmly, and I'm perfectly capable of managing my property. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She already believed her sister. Tansy and Dexter returned with a tray of brandy glasses. She personally handed me one, smiling a little too broadly. Your favorite, Dad. Remember how you always said good brandy was the best cure for all ills? I took the glass, feeling the muscles in my back tense. Something was wrong. Tansy was too insistent on me holding the glass, watching me too closely. Dexter got a glass of brandy too and stood next to me, starting to tell some story about a client of his who didn't want to sell an old house and then realized how much he was losing and ended up thanking Dexter for his persistence. I listened, half listening, glancing at the glass in my hand. At one point I noticed Tansy and Flint exchange glances, and Flint nodded slightly. It was like a signal. I brought the glass up to my nose, pretending to enjoy the flavor but actually trying to pick up extraneous odors. I didn't smell anything unusual, but that didn't mean anything. Many drugs were odorless. All eyes were on me, waiting for me to take a sip. Even Lloyd had gotten off the phone and was watching me. You know, I said, raising my glass, I'd like to propose a toast. To new beginnings, I looked at Dexter. Would you care to join me? He smiled and raised his glass. To new beginnings, he repeated. And here's to good decisions, I added, taking a step closer to him. Sometimes they aren't immediately obvious. I held out my hand with my glass as if to offer a clink. When our glasses touched, I deliberately nudged his hand slightly, creating a little confusion, at which point I quickly switched glasses. An old trick my father taught me when I was just a kid. Always have an ace up your sleeve, Wilmot, he used to say. You never know when it'll come in handy. Dexter didn't notice anything, too engrossed in his role as the charming businessman. We both took a drink. The brandy burned my throat, strong but clear. I was relieved to see Dexter drain his glass to the bottom. Tansy looked satisfied. She walked over to me and took me under her arm. How about I show you what I did to the backyard? You haven't seen my new roses. She clearly wanted to get me away before the medicine took effect. I agreed, and we went out on the patio. It was already dark, but the garden lanterns illuminated the neat rose beds. It's beautiful, I said. Elaine would have loved it. Yeah, she squeezed my hand. Dad, I wanted to talk to you about something important. What's that? Your future. About how we can take care of you. I felt her fingers digging into my arm like she was afraid I'd run away. Dexter thinks, she continued, that you shouldn't live alone in a house this big. It's dangerous at your age. Flint and Carrie and I have been talking, and we've decided. She didn't finish. There was a loud rumble from the house and then a scream. We rushed back into the living room. Dexter was lying on the floor, next to the overturned coffee table. His eyes were half closed and saliva was running from his mouth. He tried to say something, but the words came out slurred. What's wrong with him? Tansy exclaimed, rushing over to him. Dexter! Dexter! Can you hear me? The others crowded around, confused and frightened. Carrie was trying to lift his head. Flint was calling an ambulance. Had he taken something? Donald, Carrie's husband, asked. Any medication? No. Tansy looked genuinely frightened. He's not on anything. He's healthy as an ox. Her eyes flicked to the empty glass still on the table, then to me. Her eyes flashed with understanding, then horror. What have you done? She whispered. I looked at her calmly, showing no emotion. Me? Nothing. I just drank the brandy you poured for me. She turned pale and turned away, turning back to Dexter, who was now shaking and mumbling incoherently. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later. The paramedics quickly examined Dexter, took his blood pressure, checked his pupils. Do you know what he was taking? One of them asked. Nothing, Tansy replied. We were just having dinner, drinking wine, then brandy. We need to get him to the hospital, the medic said. It looks like a reaction to some kind of drug, probably sleeping pills or sedatives combined with alcohol. They loaded Dexter onto a stretcher. Tansy insisted on going with him. Before she left, she gave me a long look of accusation and fear. There was an awkward silence in the house after they left. Flint and Isabella whispered in a corner. Carrie nervously cleared the table. The children sat stone-faced. "What happened?" Flint finally asked, coming toward me. "How could he have gotten sick so suddenly?" "I have no idea," I answered. "Maybe he's allergic to something in his food?" "You seem too calm, Dad." His voice sounded suspicious, like he was expecting something like that. I met his gaze without blinking. Why should I panic? I barely know the man. Besides, he's already being dealt with by professionals. Flint opened his mouth to say something, but changed his mind. Instead, he turned to Isabella. "We should go. We have an early flight tomorrow." They said a quick goodbye and left. Carrie stayed late, helping to clear the table and put things in order. When she was done, she came over to me. "Dad, I can take you home." "Thanks, honey," I smiled at her. "That would be great." On the way, we hardly spoke at all. I could sense that Carrie wanted to ask me something, but didn't dare. When we pulled up to my house, she turned off the engine and turned to me. "Dad," she began cautiously, "Tansy told me that you have some valuable coin collection. So that's how Tansy found out. Someone in the neighborhood must have seen Pennant Hawk's visit and told her." "Tansy says a lot of things," I replied neutrally. "Not everything is to be believed." Carrie nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. "Just be careful, okay?" she said. "And call me if you need anything. I know we don't talk much, but I really care about you." "I know, honey." I stroked her hand. "Thank you." I got out of the car and headed towards the house, feeling her eyes on me. It wasn't until I got inside and locked the door that I let myself exhale. The evening hadn't gone the way Tansy had planned, but I knew it was just the beginning. Now that her plan had failed, she would become more desperate and possibly more dangerous. I walked over to the window and looked out onto the street. Carrie's car was already gone, but I knew there would be others soon. Tansy wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted, and I wasn't about to give it to her. The night after that ill-fated dinner, I didn't sleep well. I woke up every hour, listening to the sounds of the house, checking to see if anyone was trying to get in. By morning, my head felt heavy and my body ached with fatigue. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat by the window, waiting for the inevitable. It didn't take long for Tansy to arrive. Her car pulled up in front of the house at the beginning of 9. She got out, slamming the door so hard that the neighbor's dog barked. Her footsteps on the path to the porch sounded like a drum beat, sharp, determined, angry. I met her at the door before she could ring the bell. "You!" she spat out instead of greeting, pushing past me into the house. "You knew!" I closed the door and turned to her, keeping my composure. "Good morning, Tansy. How's Dexter?" "Don't pretend like you care." She ran across the living room like a hunted animal. "He's in the hospital. He's on a drip. The doctors found powerful sleeping pills in his blood. They asked if he was trying to kill himself. I had to explain that he'd never—" "What did you explain?" I interrupted without raising my voice. She stood still for a moment, then continued more quietly. "That it was a mistake. That he must have mistaken his blood pressure pills for something else." "And they believed it?" "I don't know." She sank down on the couch. "They took tests, said the police might be interested if they found anything suspicious." I sat down in the chair across from her, watching her nervously fumble with the strap of her bag. "Why did you do it, Tansy?" "Do what?" She raised her head, her eyes a mixture of fear and defiance. "Put sleeping pills in my brandy." "I didn't," she started to say, but she stopped under my gaze. "It was a harmless sleeping pill, just to make you sleep better. You were always complaining about insomnia." "Don't lie," I said quietly. "I've never complained of insomnia, and I don't need sleeping pills at family dinner." "You're the one who switched the glasses," she said offensively. "On purpose. You knew I put the sleeping pills in, and you gave them to Dexter on purpose." I stayed silent as I watched her get more and more agitated. "You've always been like this. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else, that you could see right through people." She jumped up, hovering over me. "But this time you went too far. Dexter could have died." "From a harmless sleeping pill?" I asked ironically. She fell silent, realizing she'd given herself away. "I didn't know he'd have that reaction," she said finally. "Maybe it was the alcohol." "Tansy," I stepped forward, looking her straight in the eye. "I drove a school bus for 35 years. You think I don't know what a person looks like under the influence of a strong sedative? What you gave Dexter was no ordinary sleeping pill. It was something much more serious." "We?" She tried to play innocent. "What do you mean? You. You and Flint. I saw you two exchanging glances before you handed me the brandy." Her face contorted for a moment, then she got control of herself. "You're paranoid. This has nothing to do with Flint. You're getting old, Papa, and you're getting suspicious. You see conspiracies where there aren't any." "Why do you want my coins, Tansy?" I asked her bluntly. She blinked, clearly not expecting this. "What coins?" "Uncle Harold's. The ones you've been pestering me about for weeks. The ones you suddenly remembered I existed." "I didn't—" She hesitated. "It's just a coincidence. I've wanted to rebuild our relationship for a long time. 5 years after Mom died, you didn't call. Last birthday, you sent me a card a week late. Christmas, a gift card to a store that doesn't even exist in Waco. All of a sudden you care so much? Right after I found out the value of the coins? You're not being fair." She tried to put a touch of hurt in her voice. "I've always taken care of you." "When you needed something," I nodded. "Rent money when your first husband left you. A car loan you never paid back. Help with Lloyd's tuition, who then dropped out of college after a semester." "That's not fair," she exclaimed. "I was just going through a hard time. Parents are supposed to help their children." "And children are supposed to take care of their parents when they get older," I parried, "but not to slip them sleeping pills to take over their property." She stared at me, then suddenly cried. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smearing her mascara. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "I need this money. I'm in debt. I'm being threatened by debt collectors. Lloyd needs treatment. He's got a problem." "Drugs?" I guessed. She nodded, still crying. "He got mixed up with a bad crowd. Started with pot, then moved on to something stronger. I tried to help, I really did, but I don't have the money for a good clinic. And you're sitting here with a whole condition and you don't even know it." "So you decided to take matters into your own hands?" I asked. "Slip me something to make me pass out, fall down, hurt myself, and then you and Flint would declare me incompetent and take control of my finances." She was silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any confession. "And Dexter, is he part of the plan or just a pawn?" "He— helping," she said quietly. "He's experienced in this sort of thing." "I'm sure he has," I nodded. "How many old people has he fooled? He's not a liar," she defended herself. "He really helps people optimize their assets. It's just that sometimes you have to nudge them into making the right decision." "Nudge?" I chuckled wryly. "Interesting euphemism for fraud." The phone rang. Tansy flinched but made no attempt to answer it. I put it on speakerphone. "Wilmot?" It was Flint's voice. "Are you home?" "Yeah, and your sister's here too. Listen, we need to talk. Carrie told me something, troubling, about Tansy's plans." Tansy went pale. "That traitor," she hissed. "I told her to keep her mouth shut." "I'm on my way to your place," Flint continued. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up. Tansy jumped up, grabbing her bag. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to you all unite against me," she exclaimed. You don't understand anything. None of you." She rushed for the door but turned around on the threshold. "This isn't the end, Daddy. You can't hide those coins forever. They must belong to the family." The door slammed and I heard her running to the car. A minute later, the engine roared and she drove off. I was alone in the suddenly empty house. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat down to wait for Flint. He arrived even earlier than he'd promised, and he wasn't alone. Carrie was with him. "Did Tansy leave?" Flint asked, entering the house. "Just now." I nodded, and furious. Carrie came over and hugged me. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner." "Told me what?" We sat down in the living room. Flint looked embarrassed. Carrie looked guilty. "Tansy contacted us a few weeks ago," Flint began. "Said she was worried about you, that you were getting forgetful, making strange decisions, that you had a valuable coin collection you didn't even know about, and that you needed help with your financial management." "And you believed it?" I asked, not hiding my bitterness. "At first, yes," Carrie admitted. "You know Tansy, she can be persuasive, and we were really worried. You live alone. We don't talk much." "But then Tansy moved on," Flint continued. "She came up with a plan to protect your inheritance from your senile decisions, as she put it. She wanted us to help declare you incapacitated," Carrie said quietly, "to appoint her as your guardian. She said it was for your own good, that she would take the best care of you." "And what did you say?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I said no right away." Flint shook his head. "Said it sounded like a scam. But Carrie—" "I said yes at first," Carrie whispered, not looking up. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really thought it was for your own good. But then when she told me about the sleeping pills, about the plan with Dexter, I realized it was all wrong." "I told Isabella," Flint added. "She's a lawyer. Said what Tansy was planning was a felony. I called Carrie and we decided to get involved." "When?" I asked. "When did you decide that?" "Yesterday, right before dinner," Carrie replied. "We were going to talk to you afterward, but then what happened with Dexter happened." "I saw the look you and Tansy exchanged before she handed me the brandy," I said to Flint. "Did you know she'd slipped something in?" "No." He looked genuinely shocked. "I swear I didn't know anything about sleeping pills. That look was— We agreed that I would signal when we could have a serious conversation. I thought she wanted to discuss your finances, coins, maybe offer to help you with appraising the collection. I had no idea what she was planning." "I believe you," I said after a pause. "And you, Carrie, you two have always been more honest than Tansy." "What do we do?" Carrie asked. She wouldn't stop, especially now that her plan has failed. "We need to protect you and your property," Flint said firmly. "Are these coins valuable?" "Very," I nodded. "But it's not just about them. It's about principle. It's my property, and I decide what to do with it." "Of course you do," Carrie agreed. "No one's questioning your right to manage your property, but Tansy is serious. She might go to the extreme." "Maybe we should go to the police," Flint suggested it. "Tell them about the attempted poisoning?" What would I say? I shook my head. That my daughter slipped me sleeping pills? I have no proof. Besides, it wasn't me, it was Dexter, and he's not likely to press charges against his girlfriend. Then what? Carrie looked confused. "I'll start by stashing the coins," I said. "And maybe I'll see a lawyer. I'll make a new will, make my wishes clear, so there's no ambiguity." "That's a good idea," Flint nodded. "A friend of mine in Seattle is a great lawyer, specializing in wills and estates. I can give you his contacts." "And I could stay with you for a few days," Carrie suggested, "just to make sure you're safe." "Thanks, but I'll be fine," I replied. "I don't want to disrupt your plans." "Dad, you're a stubborn old man," Carrie sighed with a slight smile, "but I respect your decision. Just promise me you'll call me if anything happens." "I promise," I smiled back. They stayed for about another hour. We drank coffee, talked about their lives, their grandchildren, their jobs, everything that families should discuss in normal meetings. It was nice to finally talk to them without pretense or strained smiles. After they left, I decided to check out the coin stash. I opened the false panel in the living room wall and froze. The box wasn't there. I frantically groped the void behind the panel, but it was indeed gone. Someone had found my stash and taken the collection. But when? How? I'd always been careful. The only time I'd left the house unattended in the last few days was last night when I'd gone to Tansy's for dinner. But how could she know about the stash? I hadn't told anyone about it. I examined the panel closely and noticed tiny scratches around it. Someone had picked it up with a tool, probably a screwdriver or a knife. Not the work of a professional. Too many marks. And then it hit me. Tansy had been so diligent about cleaning the house, checking every nook and cranny. She must have accidentally discovered the panel by tapping on the wall or noticing slight differences in the texture of the wallpaper. I made my way to the kitchen and poured myself some water. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from anger. She'd come into my house pretending to be a caring daughter while she was looking for valuables to steal, and she found it. Damn it! I sat down at the table trying to collect my thoughts. I needed to act, and fast. Tansy had probably already contacted Pennant Hawk or another collector to appraise and sell the coins. If she got rid of them in time, it would be impossible to prove anything. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Leon? It's Wilmot. I need your help." My old friend and neighbor, a former police detective, always said he missed his work. Well, now he'll get a chance to relive his youth. We'll devise a plan and get back what's rightfully mine. And Tansy will learn not to underestimate an old man just because he has gray hair and wrinkled hands. The 2 weeks after the discovery of the missing coins turned into a strange game of cat and mouse. Tansy hadn't returned my calls, but I knew from Leon, who had been keeping an eye on her house, that she hadn't gone anywhere out of town. Leon also found out that Dexter checked out of the hospital 3 days later and moved in with Tansy right away. They rarely left the house but did receive a few visitors, including a man very similar in description to Pennant Hawk. Leon and I devised a plan of action. The first step was a formal letter from a lawyer demanding the return of the stolen property. I wasn't particularly hopeful that this would work, but I wanted to leave an official trail of my attempts to resolve the matter peacefully. As expected, there was no response. Then we moved on to the second phase of the plan. I invited all the children to a family meeting at my house, scheduling it for Sunday afternoon. Tansy, as I suspected, refused to come, relaying through Carrie that she wanted nothing to do with the man who had tried to poison her fiancé. Flint and Carrie agreed at once. Sunday, I spent the whole morning making arrangements. Not that I was going to have a banquet, but I wanted it to look dignified. I baked an apple pie from Elaine's recipe, brewed strong coffee, and covered the living room table with a clean tablecloth I'd gotten from the sideboard. On the mantelpiece, I arranged the photos of the family, Elaine's and my wedding pictures, the first pictures of the children, school portraits, holidays, our family history in chronological order. Flint arrived first, at 12 sharp. Without Isabella, she'd already flown back to Seattle for work. He looked serious and a little tense. "You look good, Dad," he said, hugging me. "Did you get any rest?" "As much as possible in my situation," I replied with a slight smile. "Thanks for coming over." Carrie arrived 10 minutes later carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. "I know men don't usually get flowers," she said, embarrassed, "but I was passing by the market and thought they would liven up the room. I put the flowers in a vase, the same one Elaine had bought for our first wedding anniversary. The blue glass contrasted beautifully with the yellow and white petals. We sat down at the table and I poured the coffee. No one was in a hurry to start a conversation. Finally, Flint cleared his throat. "So, Dad, you wanted to talk about something important?" "Yes," I nodded. "About the future. Mine and yours. We're listening, Carrie said softly. I took a deep breath. What I was about to say was going to change a lot of things. You know about the coin collection that Tansy stole, I began. But you don't know the whole truth. What truth? Flint asked tensely. The collection she took is almost worthless. They looked at me with bewilderment. But you said the coins are very expensive, said Carrie. Tansy claimed the same thing. Some of them were indeed very valuable, I nodded. Especially the Flying Eagle from 857 and the Seated Liberty from 871. But I sold them 3 years ago. You sold them? Flint looked puzzled. But why? And why didn't you tell anyone? I stood up and walked over to the sideboard. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a file folder. Because I had plans for that money, I put the folder on the table. Plans that no one was supposed to know about ahead of time. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, a confirmation of an education account in the name of Sheila Broom, Carrie's daughter. I handed it to my mother. What's this? She asked, running her eyes over the lines. An education fund? In Sheila's name? Her eyes widened when she saw the amount. Daddy, that's a fortune. Enough to pay for 4 years at a good university and graduate school if she wants. I nodded. Plus some living expenses so she doesn't have to work while she studies. I pulled out another document, the same fund in Lloyd's name. Flint took it, read it, and looked at me in amazement. But Lloyd dropped out of college. He doesn't even want to go to school. Right now, yes, I agreed. But maybe someday he'll change his mind. Or that money could go to treatment for his addiction. Either way, it's his, on the condition that neither Tansy nor anyone else can access it. Only Lloyd, and only for education or treatment. Carrie looked at me with tears in her eyes. You've been planning this all along? Ever since you found out the value of the coins? Ever since I realized I don't need that much money, I answered. I am a simple man with simple needs. All my life I've lived modestly and I'm happy with it. Why should I change my habits in my old age? What about the rest of the coins? Flint asked. The ones Tansy stole. They're really from Uncle Harold's collection, but they're not particularly valuable, I shrugged. Maybe a few $100s for everything. I'd purposely left them in the jewelry box and checked on them periodically, knowing that Tansy was watching. It was a decoy. A decoy? Flint raised his eyebrows. You wanted her to steal them? I wanted to see how far she was willing to go, I corrected. And she didn't disappoint. But why? Carrie wondered. If you already had everything planned out, why the spectacle? I pulled another document out of the folder, my new will, because I needed to know who I could trust and who I couldn't before I made a final decision about what to do with the house. They stared at the will, hesitant to take it. You can read it, I said. I'm not hiding anything. Flint took the document and he and Carrie began to read it together. I watched their faces change from curiosity to surprise. You're bequeathing the house to a charitable organization? Flint finally spoke up. To the local community, to be exact, I nodded. To establish a center for the elderly who live alone, a place where they could gather, socialize, get counseling, maybe even live if organized properly. But why? Carrie asked cautiously. This is your home, our family home, which neither of you wanted to inherit, I said without reproach. Flint lives in Seattle, and he's not coming back. You, Carrie, already have a house in the suburbs that's much more comfortable than this one. And Tansy, well, Tansy would just sell it the first chance she got. But we could keep it as a memory, Carrie said uncertainly. Memory lives in people, not in walls, I replied gently. When an old man dies, his things should be useful, not gathering dust. My whole life with Elaine was spent in this house. We were happy here. May it now bring happiness to others. Flint turned the page of the will. What's this? Separate accounts for me and Carrie? Small amounts, I nodded. Enough to help in times of need, but not so large as to cause greed. I know you both work and manage on your own, but a little safety cushion never hurts. And for Tansy? Carrie asked quietly. Nothing, I answered firmly. She's made her choice. We were silent for a while. I cut the pie and put it on plates. No one was in a hurry to start eating. You planned this whole thing, Flint said at last. The whole thing with the coins, the dinner, the sleeping pills. Not exactly, I shook my head. I hadn't expected Tansy to go so far as to slip me something, but I guess she'd try to manipulate me when she found out about the coins. That's why I left the bait. But how did you know she'd slipped the sleeping pills? Carrie asked. You could have drank it yourself, and a father of 7 kids who's always up to something, and a school bus driver with 100 teenagers to take care of. I smiled. I've learned to notice when people are acting suspicious. Besides, Tansy had never been good at hiding her intentions. She was too nervous, too pushy with that brandy. And you switched glasses. Flint shook his head with involuntary admiration. That's a neat trick. Old trick, I shrugged. Your grandfather taught me when I was 10. He loved card tricks. You don't look like someone who knows card tricks, Carrie said with a smile. At 72, few people look like what they were when they were young, I replied. I used to be able to fix an engine with my eyes closed, and I used to dance with the girls lining up. Now my hands are not so dexterous, and my knees can't even take a slow waltz. But here, I tapped my temple, I'm still the same Wilmot Broom. They smiled, and the tension hanging in the air began to dissipate. We finally got down to the pie, and the conversation flowed more freely. They talked about their plans, their kids, their jobs. I listened, savoring this moment of real family togetherness that hadn't happened in years. When the pie and coffee were done, Carrie suddenly stood up and hugged me. We're sorry, Daddy, she said quietly, for not paying attention to you all these years, for not calling, for not coming to visit, and for believing Tansy without checking, Flint added, joining the hug. We should have known you were perfectly fine. I'm fine, I replied, hugging them back. You're adults with your own lives, your own worries. I understand that. But that's no excuse, Carrie insisted. Family has to come first. Mom always told us that, and we forgot. We didn't forget, I countered. We just lost sight of it for a while. But you're here now, and that's what matters. We talked for a while about the past, about the future, about seeing each other more often. We planned the next meeting, thought about how to tell Lloyd and Sheila about the educational foundations, a real family council like we haven't had since Elaine. As they were leaving, I suddenly remembered. By the way, Leon, my neighbor, former detective, found out something about Dexter Latch. What was it? Flint asked. He's got a conviction for fraud, I answered. 3 years ago, he was running the same scheme in Tulsa. He found lonely elderly people with valuable assets, gained their trust, sometimes through their children or grandchildren, and helped optimize the assets. As a result, the elderly were left with nothing, and Dexter disappeared with the money. What about his accomplices? Carrie asked. The ones he used to gain his trust? Most of the time they disappeared with their share too, I sighed. But in one case, an accomplice was arrested. A middle-aged woman, red-haired, single mom. She was posing as a social worker caring for the elderly. Red-headed? Flint frowned. Like Tansy. Exactly, I nodded. Leon showed me a picture from the police archives. It's not Tansy, but it's very similar. Same type. Dexter seems to have a certain preference for female accomplices. Do you think Tansy knows about his past? Carrie asked. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I'm guessing this isn't their first project together. Tansy said they've been dating for a few months. That's enough time to plan an operation. "We need to notify the police," Flint said firmly. "If he had a criminal record, that alone would be enough to start an investigation." "Leon has already contacted his former colleagues," I reassured him. "They were interested, especially when they found out about the sleeping pills. But they warned me that Dexter would probably disappear before they had enough evidence to make an arrest. Guys like him have a keen sense of danger." "And Tansy?" Carrie asked quietly. "What will happen to her?" I paused, looking at the pictures on the mantelpiece. One of them showed Tansy, 5 years old, sitting on my shoulders, laughing and holding onto my ears. A happy child knowing no worries or anger. "She'll either leave with him," I said at last, "or stay here and deny any involvement. Either way, she's no longer my daughter." "Daddy," Carrie began, but I shook my head. "I've made my decision, Carrie. There are some things that can't be forgiven, not because I'm vindictive, but because forgiveness in such cases only encourages repetition. Tansy needs to realize that actions have consequences." They didn't argue. We hugged goodbye and they left, promising to call more often and come back when they could. I was alone in a house that had suddenly become too big and too quiet. But for the first time in a long time, the silence was not oppressive. I felt a strange peace, as if I had shed a heavy burden I had been carrying for years. 3 days later, Leon told me that Dexter Latch had disappeared from town, and another day later, Carrie called with the news that Tansy had also left, leaving a note that she was starting a new life away from everyone who didn't appreciate her. She left no address or phone number for contact. The police tried to track them down but were unsuccessful. As Leon had predicted, they disappeared before evidence for an arrest could be gathered. The coins disappeared with them, a small price to pay for finding out the daughter's true identity. And I stayed in my house, with new plans and a new purpose. The senior center didn't have to wait for me to die. I could start now, opening the doors of my home to neighbors my own age. There is plenty of space, and companionship and mutual support is what many of us lack in our old age. Leon supported the idea and offered to organize weekly meetings to discuss books. Martha, a former teacher, volunteered to teach a drawing class. Paul, a mechanic, decided to teach everyone the basics of computers and smartphones. Even Greg, the former mailman, found a way to get involved. He knew everyone in the neighborhood and could bring in those who were in particular need of companionship. Thus began a new phase of my life. Not the one I had planned when I retired, but perhaps a more important and meaningful one. At 72, I realized that I still had a lot to give to the world, and that realization was worth all the lost coins and shattered illusions about family.